17 Forgotten fermented foods. Our grandparents ate before probiotics took over. I spent 2 weeks tracing every fermented food my own great-grandmother would have recognized against the archaeological and historical record, cross-checking each one against actual excavation reports and temple records rather than relying on the same recycled lists most wellness channels repeat from each other. I kept finding the same pattern. Every single one of these 17 foods was replaced by a pill, a powder, or a $15 bottle promising the exact same bacteria these foods already contained for free. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly when that switch happened and why almost nobody making probiotic supplements wants you to know what's sitting in your own refrigerator door. Welcome to Terra Vault. Let's count down from 17. Number 17. Traditional aged cheese. Not the plastic-wrapped slices. The real, slowly aged wheel that pastoral households across Europe and the Near East have made for thousands of years, using nothing but milk, salt, and time. The aging process is itself a controlled fermentation, with specific bacterial cultures developing over weeks or months. Research on aged cheeses has documented significant populations of lactobacillus and propionibacterium species that survive digestion and reach the gut intact, something most commercial probiotic capsules can't guarantee past stomach acid. How to use it? Choose cheeses aged at least 6 months, labeled raw milk when legally available, eaten in small daily amounts rather than occasionally. The same way pastoral households treated it, as a regular part of the table rather than an occasional indulgence. Number 16. Buttermilk. The real kind. Not the cultured product on supermarket shelves today, but the genuine byproduct left over after churning butter, which households fermented further on purpose because it kept longer and tasted better than fresh milk in a world without refrigeration. Traditional buttermilk fermentation produces lactic acid bacteria documented to support digestion of lactose that would otherwise cause discomfort, which is part of why historically lactose-intolerant populations could still consume dairy in this specific form, even in regions where fresh milk alone caused problems for most adults. Number 15. Tibicos, Mexican water kefir. Documented among indigenous communities in Mexico, cultured using cactus-derived grains entirely different from the dairy kefir grains used in the Caucasus. 2 separate fermentation traditions that developed independently, continents apart, producing a similar result through different organisms. Tibicos grains ferment sugar water into a mildly carbonated, probiotic-rich drink over roughly 2 to 3 days at room temperature. Laboratory analysis has identified multiple distinct bacterial and yeast species working together in a single culture, a level of microbial diversity. Single-strain supplements simply cannot replicate, no matter how many strains a label lists. Number 14. Unfiltered apple cider vinegar. The cloudy version with visible sediment at the bottom, called the mother. Not the clear, filtered vinegar that dominates most grocery shelves today. That sediment is itself a living colony of acetic acid bacteria, documented across multiple ancient cultures as both a preservative and a daily tonic. Modern research has examined acetic acid's effect on post-meal blood sugar response, though the evidence here remains more preliminary than for other fermented foods on this list. And I want to be straightforward about that, rather than oversell it. Number 13. Tempeh. Documented in Indonesia since at least the 13th century, made by inoculating cooked soybeans with a specific mold, Rhizopus oligosporus, which binds the beans into a dense cake over roughly 24 hours of fermentation. Unlike most fermented foods on this list, Tempeh's fermentation doesn't primarily add bacteria for gut health. It transforms the protein structure itself, making it more digestible, while the mold produces its own beneficial enzymes documented in nutritional analysis. the result has a meaningfully different texture and nutritional profile from the unfermented soybean it started as. Almost a different food entirely. Number 12. Sourdough bread. This is where it gets interesting, and where I have to explain something most bread videos skip entirely. Egyptian bakers were using wild fermentation for bread more than 4,000 years ago, before commercial yeast existed in any form. The long fermentation process, sometimes 18 to 24 hours, allows naturally occurring bacteria to partially break down gluten and phytic acid before baking. If this is bringing you value, the like button tells the algorithm exactly that, and helps this reach more people looking for recovered knowledge instead of recycled wellness trends. And if you want the complete reference, 200 plants and fermented traditions across 5 ancient civilizations, the link is in the description. Here's the detail that surprised me most in researching this entry. Commercial bread today is fermented for under 2 hours, sometimes under 1, using fast-acting commercial yeast bread specifically for speed rather than flavor or digestibility. That's the opposite of an 18-hour wild fermentation, where naturally occurring lactic acid bacteria have time to slowly break down compounds that can otherwise irritate digestion. That's not a conspiracy. It's simply that an 18-hour ferment doesn't fit a factory line built to run continuously, restock shelves daily, and meet demand at a price point most people expect to pay for bread. The bread didn't get worse because someone wanted it that way. It got worse because nobody could profitably make it the old way at industrial scale, and the slower version quietly became a specialty item instead of the daily default it used to be. Number 11. Kvass. A fermented bread beverage documented across Slavic households since at least the medieval period, made by soaking stale rye bread in water with a starter culture and letting it ferment for 1 to 3 days, producing a lightly carbonated, faintly sour drink. Kvass served a specific historical purpose, turning bread too stale to eat into something nutritionally useful again, while introducing the same lactic acid bacteria found in other fermented grains. In households where nothing could be wasted, this was less a beverage choice and more a practical solution to a problem every kitchen eventually faced. Number 10. Garum, fermented fish sauce. And here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Ancient Rome ran an enormous commercial garum industry. Fish fermented in salt for months until it broke down into a pungent, intensely flavored liquid used in nearly every Roman recipe that survives in writing. Archaeologists have found garum production facilities across the entire Mediterranean, with shipping containers traced hundreds of miles from their origin. The fermentation process generates significant levels of glutamate naturally, the same compound behind modern monosodium glutamate, centuries before anyone isolated it as an ingredient in a laboratory. Rome's most prized condiment was, chemically, doing exactly what a modern flavor enhancer does, just through bacteria instead of a factory process, breaking down fish protein over months into the same amino acid. Modern food science would later extract and sell separately. Number 9. Olives. Almost nobody knows this detail. Raw olives straight off the tree are bitter and essentially inedible due to a compound called oleuropein. Every olive you have ever eaten reached your table through fermentation or curing, a process Mediterranean households have practiced for thousands of years out of pure necessity, not preference. The fermentation process reduces oleuropein while allowing lactic acid bacteria to develop, and modern research has continued studying oleuropein itself for its antioxidant properties, even as fermentation reduces its bitterness. Different regions developed entirely different curing methods: brine, dry salt, oil, each producing a distinct bacterial profile from the same starting fruit. Number 8. Traditional pickled vegetables. Not the vinegar-only quick pickles common today, but lacto-fermented vegetables, cucumbers, carrots, beets, submerged in a simple salt brine and left to ferment using the bacteria already present on the vegetable's surface, no added culture required. This method appears independently across nearly every food culture studied, from Eastern Europe to East Asia to the American South, because salt brine fermentation requires no special equipment and no imported starter, just vegetables, salt, water, and time. That independent reinvention across unconnected cultures is itself worth noticing. When the same solution appears everywhere with no shared origin, it's usually because the solution simply works. Number 7. Miso. Documented in Japanese Buddhist temple records from the Nara period, made by fermenting soybeans with salt and a specific mold culture called koji, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, depending on the variety. We're past the halfway point now, and here's the connection I didn't expect when I started this research. Nearly every fermented food on this list relies on a population of microorganisms that modern science is still working to fully map. Recent research initiatives studying the human gut microbiome have identified thousands of bacterial strains we can't yet culture in a lab under controlled conditions, meaning some of what these 17 foods deliver, we genuinely cannot replicate in a supplement yet, even if we wanted to, even with unlimited funding. The supplement industry can isolate and sell maybe a dozen well-studied strains. A single spoonful of properly fermented sauerkraut juice can contain hundreds of different interacting strains, most of which have never been individually named. Number 6. Natto. Fermented whole soybeans, documented in Japan since at least the Edo period, known for a famously strong smell and a distinctly sticky texture that comes from the fermentation byproduct itself. Natto fermentation produces nattokinase, an enzyme that has been the subject of modern research into circulatory health, and vitamin K2, a form of vitamin K that's difficult to obtain in meaningful amounts from most other food sources. Japan remains the largest per capita consumer of natto today, and some researchers have pointed to that consistent vitamin K2 intake as one factor worth studying in regional longevity patterns, though the full picture involves many overlapping variables. Number 5. Kombucha. Documented in China during the Han Dynasty, roughly 2,000 years ago, brewed using a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast that converts sweetened tea into a tangy, lightly effervescent drink over 1 to 4 weeks. What almost nobody mentions, the modern $4.5 billion commercial kombucha industry pasteurizes most bottled products for shelf stability, which kills the live cultures that made the original beverage valuable in the first place. You're often paying premium price for the flavor of a fermented drink with none of the fermentation left alive inside it. Reading the label for the words raw and unpasteurized is the only reliable way to know whether you're buying the original tradition or just its flavor profile. Number 4. Yogurt, the traditional kind. Documented among nomadic pastoral cultures across Central Asia for thousands of years, made simply by allowing fresh milk to ferment with naturally occurring or carried forward bacterial cultures, long before refrigeration existed to keep milk fresh any other way. Traditional yogurt fermentation produces lactobacillus and streptococcus species that have been studied extensively, forming the basis for much of the modern probiotic supplement industry that now sells, in capsule form, what households made in a bowl for free. Number 3. Kefir. Documented among mountain communities in the Caucasus, where families guarded their kefir grains carefully and passed them down between generations rather than selling them, since a kefir culture, once established, can be maintained indefinitely without ever needing to be purchased again. Kefir grains contain a more diverse microbial community than yogurt, with documented populations of bacteria and yeast working together, each strain feeding and balancing the others. A single batch of grains, cared for properly, could theoretically remain in continuous use for a century or more, fed daily with fresh milk the same way a family heirloom gets maintained rather than replaced. Number 2. Sauerkraut. Documented use stretches back more than 2,000 years, with historical accounts describing laborers building the Great Wall of China, sustaining themselves partly on fermented cabbage during long construction seasons, far from fresh food supply. The fermentation process is remarkably simple. Cabbage, salt, thyme, yet produces one of the most extensively studied sources of lactic acid bacteria in the entire fermented food category, requiring no specialized equipment a household wouldn't already own. Number 1. Kimchi. Documented in Korea since at least the Three Kingdoms period, evolving over more than 1,000 years from a simple salted vegetable preservation method into the complex, chili-forward dish recognized today, though the chili pepper itself only arrived after contact with the Americas, meaning kimchi's fermentation tradition predates its most famous ingredient by centuries. Modern research has documented kimchi's fermentation, producing one of the most bacterially diverse profiles of any food on this entire list, which may help explain why South Korea even developed a specially packaged version for astronauts, engineering a fermented food stable enough to survive a trip to the space station without losing its live cultures along the way. A genuinely difficult technical problem for a food whose entire value depends on staying alive. 17 foods, all fermented using nothing but salt, thyme, and bacteria already present in the environment or carried forward from a previous batch, long before anyone packaged a single strain into a capsule and charged $40 a bottle for it. Every single tradition on this list developed independently, in households that had no contact with each other, no shared written instructions, and no access to a microscope. Just generations of paying close attention to what worked and repeating it. That's not a conspiracy targeting any one company. It's simply that a live, diverse bacterial culture sitting in your refrigerator is much harder to patent and sell at scale than an isolated strain grown in a lab and pressed into a pill. You cannot patent sauerkraut. You can patent a specific lab-isolated strain with a brand name attached to it, manufacture it consistently, and charge a premium for the consistency itself, which is a real value in some cases, but it's a different value than what a jar of properly fermented cabbage has been quietly providing for free in cellars and root cellars for thousands of years. Tell me in the comments which of these 17 you already had in your kitchen growing up, and tell me which civilization you want explored next: Egyptian, Ayurvedic, Chinese, or Appalachian. Whichever one shows up most in the comments is the one I build the next full video around. The next video I'm already researching looks at a single fermented condiment mentioned in 3 completely unrelated ancient civilizations that never had any contact with each other. And the reason all 3 landed on nearly the same recipe is going to surprise you. If you want the complete reference now, 200 plants and remedies across 5 ancient civilizations with full historical sourcing, the link is in the description. Subscribe. We're here every 48 hours, recovering what got left behind.